Welcome to Teatime Oddities, the podcast where we explore the strange and the unusual throughout history. I'm your host, Danielle, and today we'll be discussing Centralia, Pennsylvania. So, pop the kettle on and grab a warm cup of tea, and let's get started. Welcome back to the podcast, everybody. I am recording this actually on April 4th, and this is supposed to be March's episode, but I have been so sick lately that I literally could not even begin to record. If you saw my Instagram story, you would have heard how my voice just did not sound right at all. And I really wanted to do this episode justice and do it with a normal-ish sounding voice. I'm not quite all the way better, but I'm better enough that I can do the podcast. So if you hear an odd sniffle or a cough, sorry, I will try to cut everything out, but I am still sick. Hopefully everybody is doing okay out there. It's very much cold and flu season where I'm at, so hopefully you're staying safe. And let's just get straight into the episode. I'm not drinking a tea today because I just can't stomach drinking anything but water right now. So I know, sacrilege, but it is what it is. All right, let's get into it. So today's episode, we are going to be discussing Centralia, Pennsylvania, which is actually a ghost town of sorts. This place is somewhere I've actually been. It was about 2 hours away from where I lived when I was in Pennsylvania, but now I'm living in California, so can't go there currently, and even if I could, you'll see later why it's not really somewhere you want to visit now. Before we get into the history of the town, I actually want to tell you this cool fact I found. The game Silent Hill was actually greatly inspired by this town, which is so cool. And when I went there, honestly, you can kind of see the similarities. I'll try to post some pictures of when I went to Centralia, but I kind of have to dig through my hard drive to find them, so I may not be able to post any. Centralia is located in Columbia County, Pennsylvania. This land was originally inhabited by Native Americans who were sadly forced out by white settlers. This happened in 1749, and they paid them £500 or $603, which in today's money would be $28,667. And I also want to mention that obviously no amount of money can really make up for the fact that they took these people's homes, so I just wanted to put that out there. This stolen land was used to build the Reading Railroad, which came from Reading, Pennsylvania, obviously, and went all the way to Fort Augusta, which is now called Sunbury. Sunbury was actually about 15-20 minutes from my house when I lived in Pennsylvania, and I didn't really know that going into this, so kind of made it a little creepy, not gonna lie. Not often do these stories kind of like intermingle with my actual life, so it's very interesting when it does. Now, if you're familiar with this region of Pennsylvania, it is well known for mining, specifically coal. However, mining did not begin in this area until 1856. This mining would unfortunately have catastrophic effects as the years went by. Now, if you're familiar with Centralia at all, you know that it is famous for having fires. Not wildfires, but underground fires. And it is disagreed upon how the fires were originally started, but most of the theories state that 1962 was when these fires began. So, in 1962, an effort to clean up the town landfill was put into action. Like previous years, all the waste was moved to an abandoned part of the strip mine pit and lit on fire. Because what better way to get rid of trash than to light it on fire? On a side note, some people do actually still burn their trash in Pennsylvania, and I cannot get over how horrifying that is to me. Besides the fact that it's horrible for the environment, it's obviously not safe, as you'll see from this story. I know that it's like just a usual thing there, and a lot of my family members did it, at least in the rural parts, obviously, probably not the city. I hope not the city. I'll just never get over driving down the street and seeing someone just lighting a fire in their front yard, so it just isn't right. I'm too much of a city girl to be okay with that. Back to the trash fire. This year, the fire was not fully extinguished. The fire spread into a large maze of mine shafts below the city. And coal is a very flammable substance. All throughout under the city were veins of coal. And that's how this fire eventually spread to be under the whole city. That is the most popular account. There were some others that I wanted to talk about. One other tells of a trash collector dumping burning coals or hot ash into the landfill and causing the fire to break out. There were measures in place, likely a clay barrier to prevent fires from entering the mines, but they had not been upkeeping it and the fire got through there. Either way, the fire entered the mining tunnels and followed the coal veins, creating a subterranean fire. Subterranean fires are fires that take place underground. So that's kind of the extent of my knowledge of underground fires. Sorry, it wasn't as exciting as I kind of built it up to be, but that is what it is. I studied art in college, so that's about all you're going to get from me. Shockingly, the town was not made aware of the severity of the fires until 1979. So around, 10 years later, a little more? Kind of horrifying. This only occurred because a local who owned a gas station was checking an underground tank and noticed it was hot. Upon checking the temperatures, it was 172 degrees Fahrenheit or 77.8 degrees Celsius. I just want to take a moment to say here, an underground gas tank is 172 degrees Fahrenheit. That is literally terrifying because gasoline is flammable, coal is flammable, and all those things mixing together, just, let that sink in for a second. Even after this instance at the gas station, the problem only gained statewide attention after a young boy named Todd Dubonsky, sorry if I'm butchering that, fell into a sinkhole. The sinkhole was approximately 4 feet by 150 feet, and it opened up beneath his feet while he was in his backyard. Thankfully, his cousin Eric Wolfgang was there to pull him out the hole in time. The sinkhole was later tested and contained lethal amounts of carbon monoxide and hot steam. So, had this boy been in the hole any longer than what he had been, he probably would have passed away. Despite this almost tragic event, most of the town was unsure if they were in danger, let alone if they wanted to leave the area. So clearly the government was taking a hands-off approach in this whole thing because people weren't even sure if they should leave the area. I mean, a boy almost died and the government still didn't really do much. It wasn't until 1983, almost 21 years after the fire began, that the US government provided funds for the residents of Centralia to relocate. The total funds were around $42 million. The United States Postal Office discontinued the zip code of the town, which was 17927, and all the property was invoked as eminent domain. Pretty much the government just takes the land back and says, it doesn't belong to you anymore, it's our land. Which kind of is interesting, looping back to how this place was originally founded, which was someone taking the land from someone else to begin with. So, very interesting. The town of Centralia was left abandoned, as well as the local village of Byrnesville, which I hope I'm pronouncing correctly. Some people refused to leave the area, though, and as it was their home after all, but the majority of the residents who stayed have been evicted by the state for their safety. While most of the structures were torn down by the county, the area still contains paved roads, cemeteries, and a church that is unaffected by the fires. There's also a portion of a once major highway, Pennsylvania Route 61. They attempted to repair the road many times, but there were simply too many cracks and sinkholes, not to mention dangerous amounts of carbon monoxide in the air. So it was eventually closed off, and the route was rerouted around this road. This highway actually became known as Graffiti Highway, which I will expand upon in a moment, but first I want to share a little fun story here. My parents grew up in Pennsylvania, and they were driving around this area, visiting my dad's extended family, and they had accidentally gotten turned around. Now, this was in the 80s, so this was before cell phones. They had gotten lost and were accidentally on Route 61, so Graffiti Highway. Thankfully, they turned around and didn't go too far, but, they still were on a very dangerous stretch of road, and it's kind of scary, that even after this had been known to be a dangerous place, they still didn't properly take the measures to keep people from accidentally going on this road. I mean, For Pete's sake, come on, people. But thankfully my parents are fine and they got back to where they were going. So back to Graffiti Highway. I want to talk about my personal experiences before I go into some of the, general information. When I visited Graffiti Highway, I went with some family members and we weren't intending to trespass, but I'm pretty sure this was trespassing. But we went on the highway and it was very long and windy. There were trees right to the edge of the road and it was still paved, but there was graffiti all over the road. I mean, you could barely see the pavement in some places. It was so thick. My aunt and I kind of wanted to graffiti as well, but we didn't bring any spray paint and, I kind of wish we did, honestly. It was honestly kind of beautiful to see just like the pure expression of some people and stuff. I mean, obviously there were a lot of inappropriate doodles as well, if you catch my drift, but for the most part, it was just a lot of colorful drawings and, people saying, turn back, don't go any further. The part that was the most creepy to me was that when you're walking on this highway, you can feel through your shoes the warmth from the pavement. That's how hot the fires were. The fires have pretty much been contained at this point, and they're not as intense as when they first started, so you can't really see steam coming up out of the ground like you used to be able to. Still pretty crazy, and also the fact that when you're on this highway, it should be flat, paved road, but it warped up and went down. There were like holes in the ground in some places. I mean, there was this one part that we took a picture on, I'll try to find it, where it literally looked like a wave crashing into the floor with pavement. So creepy, so weird. And I love stuff like that. I love abandoned places. The highway and the surrounding area was very much abandoned. There was not really any buildings. I think we saw like 1 or 2 houses, but I don't think anyone was living in them. Honestly, if I wasn't aware of the fact there was an underground fire here, I probably wouldn't have known. I mean, you used to be able to see smoke coming out of the ground, but besides the warmth on your feet, like I mentioned, there wasn't really any other sign of fire. I know that nowadays during the winter months you can see smoke more easily because obviously it's cold out in the air, but most times you can't really see any smoke anymore. Unfortunately, the highway has been covered in dirt and blocked off due to safety issues and criminal activity in the area. And I will say that when we were there were a lot of sketchy people, definitely a lot of beer cans and needles. So I do understand why they had to cover it up. To wrap this up, I just want to go over how this whole incident could have been avoided. And this one careless action, whether malicious or accidental, caused a whole area to become uninhabitable. It's very sad, and there were people living here. I mean, somebody just like you and me who has a house, a family, a job, a life, and you have to uproot that all to escape a dangerous situation that, the government wasn't even making clear was dangerous. And I think that's the scariest part, is that no one was really caring until, a kid almost died. And I mean, a lot of people hate on the government for a lot of things, and a lot of it can be justified, but I think stuff like this just gets on my skin the most because it's just careless and honestly just heartbreaking, because I've been in that area where Centralia is, and my family kind of came from that area. And it's not a rich area. It's not like these people could afford to move to a different house. And even with the ability to move to a different house, it was still their home and where they came from. So it's just very sad. I looked up how long this fire could burn for, and as of 2023, this fire could burn for over 200 more years. So that's pretty crazy. And I want to end the podcast with some quotes from residents of Centralia. And I'm going to play some clips rather than quoting it myself, because I feel like these people deserve to, have people hear their stories and stuff. And I highly recommend you check out this documentary that I'm taking these clips from. It's by PBS, and it was titled Centralia Fire from 1982. You can find the whole documentary on YouTube. So I'll just let them close out the podcast for me.
Well, it isn't very comfortable to live here anymore with the mine fire and the gases that we have to put up with. And just we're pleading for help all the time and don't seem that we're getting anybody's listening.
I didn't know that the town was being slowly eaten away. I didn't know that the community was being slowly destroyed. If we want to save this community for our posterity, we've got to do something now to save it.
I felt that the government knew what it was doing. I felt that I didn't have a right. I wasn't an engineer. I was only a housewife, mother. What do I know about mine fires? But when they came back, when the government came back and drilled around my property and the temperatures were 626 degrees, I knew that they didn't know what they were doing.
Really, I don't know what to say anymore. But I would like to go back. Like MacArthur said, I shall return.
Has it broken your spirit?
No, it has not broken my spirit one iota. I will be back in Centralia someday living.
You can find a full list of my sources in the description below. You can also find me on Instagram at Teatime Oddities. I post photos related to the episodes as well as odd stories in the middle of the month before the next episode. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Teatime Oddities. Make sure to keep the kettle on and check in next month for another episode. Goodbye.